Broadcasting from Baltimore, Maryland, this is 5x3 Radio, where strength is for everyone. I'm your host, Emily Sokolinski, owner of 5x3 Training, a strength and conditioning gym in Baltimore, along with my co-host, Rebecca Fishburne, founder of Cornerstone Strength Maryland. Each week, Rebecca and I will discuss the ins and outs of strength training, why there is a no one-size-fits-all approach, and why strength is so important in our daily lives. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Now, on with the show. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast. This one's just with me and Rebecca. I know.
No Diego.
No Diego today. He's not into we got him for a couple episodes and now he's focusing on his new project in his office. So we it's just the two of us today. So you get us. Before we get into our topic at hand today, I just want to do one last thank you and shout out to our listener from Minnesota who sent us a lovely thank you card in the mail, along with a very generous donation to the Charm City Strong Woman contest, to the Ullman Foundation. So it was addressed, Dear Emily, Rebecca, and Diego. Thank you for your podcasts. Of course, it's Rebecca and I really who do the podcast, but that's okay.
Wow.
I wish I had heard them 15 years ago, but now is a close second. And then it says, please find a check, to the Ullman Foundation. I miss Baltimore. If I still live there, I live at your gym too. So this is the gentleman whose question in regards to training during middle age was our kind of 2 podcast question.
See, so I like this. He's demonstrating an excellent way to be involved in the strong woman competition.
Absolutely.
Despite distance.
Absolutely. I mean, anybody can make a donation. This was very nice. He sent a check, and I'll send that right over to Ullman. If you want to mail a check in, you can mail it to the Ullman Foundation or to me, and I can pass it on to them. You can also just go to our page, my Charm City Strong Woman page, which is on our Facebook page. Or if you can't find it, just email me, Emily@5x3.com, and I'll be happy to pass on the link to you. We're also doing a t-shirt campaign. So you can purchase a t-shirt, a Charm City Strong Woman t-shirt in 2 different colors, yellow or jade, which are the volunteer and the competitor colors. And you can buy a shirt and support Ullman that way as well. So lots of ways to help the Ullman House and the Ullman Foundation. So today's topic, we've spoken about this before, and Rebecca reminded me we did this when we were talking about tasks versus movements, but we want to kind of separate it from that topic and
circle back.
Yeah. Because there are only so many topics we can discuss, right? We're bound to talk about something that we've already talked about. And this was actually a topic from Ryan, Coach Ryan, who was at the gym last night. And I just said, I need a topic. Rebecca and I are podcasting. We need a topic. And he suggested discussing variations on certain lifts and why would we do them? Why would we substitute, one of the regular lifts like the squat with a pause squat or a box squat? Why and when? So I figure let's go ahead and start to list some of the different variations and kind of get into why would we introduce this? When would we introduce this? Why would you want to introduce some of these variations on the big lifts in your own training? If let's say you have a coach or don't have a coach, how could you determine when they might be the right time to change things up? So
I don't know if you were saying this before earlier, but I guess it sort of seems like you might introduce a variation. I'm just speaking generally now. Yes. You might introduce a variation during the novice progression, but maybe more often or more typical, a variation might be introduced in intermediate programming when more variety or more lift or more work is needed. So some of the situations, I guess, that we had sort of brainstormed ahead of time. So you talked to me this time instead of Diego.
I did. So I was texting you.
I'm in on what's going on today. But sometimes for a novice, you might have a situation where a variation might be an aid to learning.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is movement challenged or something along those lines, of variation might be useful. Or the other situation that I was telling you I'm dealing with currently with a new client is a variation as a way to overcome a fear,
Sure.
like an intense, paralyzing, afraid to move in certain ways, like terror that her back will break.
So is that a because she had a bad experience in the past? Because that could be something that you encounter too.
Yeah. So this is like an individual who has, I guess, pretty consistently throughout her adult life, as she's become more sedentary, tweaked her back on multiple occasions to the point where she's been, brought to tears, laying in, it's sort of like, people will address back pain the way they, our culture suggests, which is, become immobile, lay in bed, that doesn't usually help, but that's been her experience up until this point. So to even get her to get to, to do a hip hinge, just the basic, we sometimes will use a dowel and go through a dowel drill to teach someone that movement pattern if they're having trouble with that with a deadlift, even getting her to hinge over to where she's like, what would you call that? Like maybe about 40, 45 degrees over or something. Like that's a big improvement from where she was the first day when she came in.
Yeah.
I honestly have never seen anybody with so much terror in their eyes about a movement.
I'm impressed she has even come in then.
Yeah.
She decided to even, do something and start.
She's actually the wife of a client of mine, and he's been sort of gently nudging her towards strength training for probably 3 years now. I mean, I've had other conversations with her where other points along the way, she was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to get started.
So this would be, let's start with that. So this is we teach the deadlift, but for some people, they can't necessarily get into a good position off the floor properly. So in some people's cases, it's not a fear. It's just definitely the movement pattern isn't there. So what do? You raise, this would be kind of a modification, right? You would raise the bar up. I guess this would be kind of a rack pull, but a very light rack pull, not even a rack pull. I mean, you're talking about like raising it up with mats or bumpers, just so it gets to just below the person's knee. And you could easily put that bar on spotter arms and have it set up so it's just below the knee. I guess in her case, that way she's not bent over that far, right? She has a very small range of motion from the bar to standing, or from even the dowel. That would definitely be a variation, that I would probably.
That's like an extreme
example of somebody, because there you're really dealing with the fear of that hinge. So
and honestly, like after the first time where I was like, all I want you to do is like just hinge over as far as you're comfortable doing. Just hinge over. Now stand back up. Like and you could just see the terror in her eyes. And that time she may be like when she first did it, it was almost imperceptible.
Yeah.
The movement that she made. Yeah. And after she did a couple of those, she looked at me and she was like, I'm really surprised that didn't hurt.
Yeah.
So for her, it is just overcoming this fear of movement initially.
Did you have her at all, like just say, oh, go pick that up. Like just go pick that box up off the floor. Go get.
She picks something up by keeping her torso rigid and upright.
Interesting.
She leans on something, slowly bends her knees, and will keep her from her hips to her head is perpendicular to the ground.
That's a real fear. Because I mean, I've had people where they look at the barbell and they don't want to pick that up. And I say, well, you pick things up in your life. See that box, like my little plyo box, it's about 12 inches off the floor. I'll say, well, how would you pick that up? And they would go over there and they pick it up. And I say, okay, so you picked that up this way. You kept it close to you, that's what that is. And they kind of go.
Or like two-handled shopping bags, right? On either side of a person.
Yeah. So in that case, it's just more of, well, I can't pick that up, but oh, that's a box. I know how to pick that up. I say, well, yeah, so we're going to teach you how to pick that up better. But in this case, it's really just that fear because she's been injured so many times before, not from this movement that this exercise that you're trying to teach her, but just in general from moving poorly, probably just bad movement mechanics. And that is a big fear. So yeah, that would be that variation would be an extreme variation. But in a sense, it's to get the person confident. I mean, start them off so that they decide to continue and get over their fear. For somebody else it's not the fear, it's just more of their mechanics are pretty poor. They just haven't figured out how to get in position. So you start them from the top down. And then as they get more comfortable, more confident, and their body starts to understand the movement better, you start to just lower them, and all of a sudden they're on the floor. So that would be just the regular person coming in, not the extreme where they're so fearful of moving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's that deadlift. There's kind of like the rack pull. What about like an RDL, like a Romanian deadlift, where you're starting from the top and lowering the bar to the not to the floor, but just to about mid shin? Have you ever, I guess you've used that with any of your clients in the beginning? I mean, I definitely have. Yeah.
That's where this individual will go next. Once I can get her to a place where she can like just, do that hip hinge movement to an almost torso parallel to the floor. Right. Then, okay, do that while you're holding this.
Yeah. So that's a movement we might introduce very early on to somebody, not even the deadlift, just can you hinge, can you slide this bar down your leg? Whereas somebody who's already into their program, who's learned to deadlift, that variation may be introduced as a lighter day, right? They can't deadlift heavy every time. So then you might have the person doing an RDLs on one day instead of a heavy deadlift, and then their heavy deadlift on another day. I've often used the RDL if I've transitioned somebody from a conventional deadlift to a sumo deadlift. So the person has a real long torso, right? They're having a very difficult time trying to keep their back tight. As the weight gets heavier, switching them to a sumo deadlift allows them to stay a little bit more upright. And they have an easier time, but we don't want to lose that hip hinge movement. So there, the RDL would be introduced on that other day, kind of that, that maybe that later day. So they can still get that hinge. It's going to be with lighter weight. So they're not losing, the mechanics of that lift. And they're also gaining some hamstring and glute, work but they're leaving the sumo deadlift as their heavier, their heavy deadlift day. So that would be a variation I would use.
That's a variation plus a variation.
Exactly. It's a triple variation. So that's where I would use the RDL if I substitute the sumo deadlift for a conventional deadlift. We do that quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's a good explanation too of why you might use a sumo deadlift.
I can couple a number of people I've had who have such long torsos. As the weight gets heavier, everything just kind of crumbles. It's very individual, but those are the people that I kind of use that with. What about a pause deadlift for you? When might you?
Yeah, like I actually sometimes I call it a hovered deadlift. Like I think I pronounced that wrong, but it's essentially like a pause right off the floor. If I'm trying to teach somebody in the learning process, right, in the teaching progression, if they're not understanding how to get the slack out of the bar and stay balanced in midfoot, just like slowing that whole thing down, taking a second to think or notice just as the plates are breaking off the floor. Yeah. And just kind of hover it there and feel what that feels like to have the weight of the bar in your hands and be centered in the middle of your foot instead of forward in your toes or, whatever. So I'll sometimes use like a version of a pause deadlift, a hovered deadlift as a teaching tool.
Yep. When you, and so you would use that kind of early on if the person's still having a difficult time learning
I was just using that with a long torsoed individual recently.
Yeah, that's a good one because it's learning how to take the slack out of the bar, feel the bar heavy in the hand, however you want. I usually say take the click out of the bar.
Yeah.
So you hear the click of the plates. And then learning to keep that bar on your legs. Mostly, oftentimes I'll use that because the bar tends to they tend to shift forward the minute they start to come off the floor and the bar gets off their legs. So that's a good way to keep them, feeling the bar on the legs. Have you ever introduced pause deadlifts early on in someone's training? I have. And they're novice.
Let me think about that. You tell your thing and let me think, because I feel like there was an occasion where I did that aside from just the teaching process with the Hoover.
It was just one of my clients who was having a really tricky time staying over the bar. Like she wanted to lift her chest up too soon every time, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so we introduced we tried to pause deadlift. So she would kind of pause, put it down, pause, put it down, pause, finish, right? So trying to get her to feel the push of the legs. We've tried, we did that for a couple weeks. That seemed to help. As the weight got heavier, that definitely helped. And then eventually it just became more, her body just became a lot more aware of, oh, it's in my legs. There might've been a cue, and I can't remember exactly what I finally hit on that helped her figure out how to push, really push with the legs, that it's the knees that are going back. So because that was what was making her, come up too soon. There's something about the bar being on the legs, but we use pause deadlifts as a way to kind of start that process of thinking of the legs doing the work, the pushing away from the floor. But then there was something that really clicked with her eventually. And now, as Ryan said last night, watching her, goes, those look like deadlifts. But definitely the pause helped. At least it helped to get us to a better place with, okay, what's going to really click with her? Because everything was there. Just the bar would come off the legs right at the last second off the thighs. Right. That was the kicker. That was we were missing. Like what's going to make her understand to stay over longer and drag it up keep it on the thighs. So that's the only time I've ever really used pause deadlifts with a newer client in the very beginning of their training program.
I'm not really, I thought I had done that at some point, but I'm still not coming up with the example. But I think like anytime there's so much going on in a person's mind when they're first learning stuff.
Yes.
And sometimes just adding a pause into the movement during the learning process gives a novice just a split second to process what's happening a little more clearly and have it make sense in their body. So it gets to the point where they don't have to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And she wasn't frustrated by that. I mean, she was frustrated because she knew what she was supposed to do and she could hear us, but it wasn't, wasn't translating into her body. But the pauses, she got, and they weren't hard. It wasn't difficult. It was just, how do I keep this feeling going? Once I'm not pausing, how do I continue to feel what I just felt when I did pause? Usually pause deadlifts are introduced to people's programs who have a hard time keeping the bar on their legs. I find that's, or they get to a certain point where the bar gets off the floor quickly, gets to their knees, and then they kind of get stuck. Right. Because they'll shift forward or they'll lift their chest or something will change. So the pause deadlift makes their body and their mind be okay with being in that position, kind of feeling that's what works for me. Pause deadlifts have always worked for me in that case. Like it gets to my knees. Can I finish the movement if it gets to my knees? Yes, I can. And for many people, it's that feeling of like, it gets to my knees. Now what do I do? And then kind of fighting, getting past that sticking point. It's like a sticking point with some people's deadlifts. So that's where I'll use it. But that's for somebody often who's been training for a while.
Well, and that, like what you're describing, is also maybe why you would use a rack pull with somebody too, that like finish the movement.
Exactly. The rack pull would be somebody who's having a hard time at the very top. The pause deadlift would be somebody who's just tends to get to a certain point and then drift forward, right? So the bar will get off the legs, as opposed to learning to keep it on the legs and then finish. Like once you get there, just keep pushing. So a pause deadlift would be introduced there. So those are deadlift variations. Are there any others? We kind of talked about the rack pull, RDLs, pause deadlifts, hover deadlifts. Those are pretty much the ones that, we might use with people either in the beginning of their training or, intermediate trainees.
Yeah.
What about the press? Press variations.
Yeah, I mean, I use a strict press a lot with people. And I think I was saying this the other day too, especially if it's a new lifter, somebody who doesn't have a background with barbells at all, and they're learning virtually, right? Like if it's like, via Zoom, and then, they're set up in True Coach, like it's just too many things to think about with the bottom position elbows, where the elbows go, flat wrists, like people drop the elbow and bend the wrist, and you want to get those things drilled in.
Yes.
And then, okay, we'll come back and add the bounce later. And sometimes, for somebody, if you sort of hold off on Olympic press aspect of it with the hip bounce, for people who are good movers, they almost figure it out on their own.
Exactly.
If you just give them the idea, like, okay, we're going to keep doing like we've been doing, but I want you to think about the top as being your stop position, and then, come down and go back up quickly, and they'll kind of end up just naturally getting the feel of that stretch reflex out of the bottom.
Yep. Yeah. I know Pete Trupas uses the strict press. I remember he talking about that once. Like, that's how he introduces the press to people. He really just starts with that. And
especially like people who are poor movers and have no concept of the fact that they're push pressing every single time.
Yeah.
And there's so many other pieces with press that people, are using their brain power on.
Yeah.
That when you're also saying like tight legs, lock your knees, like whatever it is, they're like, what are you talking about? My knees were locked.
And you're absolutely right. Like somebody who's doing online coaching, right? And maybe it's somebody you've never worked with in person before. You've never had a session with. Trying to teach them the press with the hips and the bounce can be just nightmarish. So starting with the strict press would be ideal for me too. I think if I had the person in person, so with me at the gym, I will, and my coaches do the same thing. We will go through the process of, okay, put your hands on your hips, do the whole kind of drill. If that person, once we do that, and then we get the bar back in the hand after we've shown where it starts, where it goes, if we'll do it slowly. I tend to do it very slowly. Move your hips forward and there's no bounce. It's just move the hips forward, hold it, start to press the bar, get under the bar, right? So it's kind of like a real slow pause press. It's like,
well, I mean, it's essentially like a tempo.
Yeah, exactly. You're just going to break it down into two parts. And then the person who moves well, as you said, who can, now move quickly, now move the hips fast, they automatically see that bar kind of go down. Right? They feel that. Someone else who doesn't move well, they move fast, the bar goes away from them, the bar goes up before the hips go, and you can see that that's clearly not going to work. So I'll either not worry about the bounce with that person and just have them go hips forward, press the bar. It's almost like a strict press, except their hips they are initiating, quote unquote, with the hips first, just not aggressively. If in a week I'm not seeing that really helping, we take out the hips and we just strict press. And it's amazing what that will do for somebody who then just has to focus on, where's the bar go? How do I stay tight in my legs? Because the hips kind of move forward, right? Anyway, because you're pressing the bar back. So you have to lean back, which moves the hips forward, which kind of puts your weight a little bit onto your toes. But you're not thinking about aggressively, purposefully moving those hips forward. I come back to that after a couple of weeks where all of a sudden the press is now heavy enough where strict pressing is going to become, frustrating because it's just getting heavy, and having that stretch reflex, having more muscle mass down there to help is going to help them. The hips all of a sudden are there. Yeah. It's like the brain, they've been able to separate the two. So that's if the person doesn't move well, isn't getting that bounce from the beginning. And then, as you said, some people who will get it like day one, and then that's it. They have it. They've got the movement. but being able to use that strict press in there immediately, no one questions that. No one says, well, I don't want to do the strict press. I want to stay. They are happy to take those hips out of the equation. No one argues.
One less thing to think
exactly.
about.
No one argues with me. No one argues with me.
Yeah.
So I can easily see, like, if you're doing online coaching, staying with that. And then
So
do you ever transition? Because you do a lot more online coaching than I do. Do you ever, are you able to transition to like using the hips, using the bounce with some people, or is some people just kind of strict pressing, just,
I have some people who are still just strict pressing.
Yeah.
And I probably don't foresee that many different scenarios that might change that.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, like sometimes it'll just sort of like I was saying, happen naturally. Like you've got, so if you've got with the hip bounce, the Olympic press, what's that, a 2.0?
Right.
And then you've got the 1.0, which is like the strict press, and the 1.5 or whatever, where you just do the hip bounce on the first one, and then the other ones are like the stretch. Well, I guess 1.0 would be
that was the old version.
A strict press where it starts in a dead stop position.
Yep.
And then that's your first rep, but then your subsequent reps start at the top.
Yeah, well,
so you get like a stretch reflex out of that, and then I guess the 3.0 is the version where it's a strict press starting from a dead stop each time.
Yes, yeah. So you have the 1.0 is the press that we used to teach 10 years ago. That was the original way to press, which was basically move the hips. It's kind of like my version of when I'm teaching it slowly. When I'm teaching somebody the like hips, then press, get under. Except the 1.0 was hips, press. Then the bar comes down and goes right back up, down and right back up. So there is no stop. There's no pause. It's just you're getting that stretch reflex. But it starts with the hips forward and start to press. It kind of starts with the slow-mo version of the...
And sometimes if I start somebody with the 3.0, where each time it's a strict dead stop at the bottom, strict press. And that's really like primarily because if it's somebody that I'm working with online and they're having trouble drilling in that bottom position and getting the elbows in the right place and keeping the wrists flat, and they haven't figured out how to move elbows and wrists independent of each other. Right. That's why I'll start a person with the 3.0 so they can learn where their elbows are and where their wrists are. And then once they start to get that pretty consistently, then I'll introduce the idea of like, you could speed up the bottom part of that after your first one, and then kind of transition to that 1.5 version. So they can maybe lift a little bit heavier weight that way. A lot of times then though, the issue is they start like shortchanging range of motion and stopping at their teeth instead of coming all the way back down to that start-stop position.
It's funny.
Or they don't kind of get as tight down there. They lose that start-stop, that correct bottom position.
It is funny how we get the same, like that happens to my clients too. The same thing happens to they start to come, then it becomes like I had one of my clients who we're trying to get him to kind of, get it off his shoulders, get it off his chest. So he got it up to his chin. It's gotten further and further with the start position now up to his nose. I'm like, can you bring it down to really? Yeah. Like, really? Yeah. Just okay, right there, right below your chin. Because now he holds it, but it's up, it like stops at his eyes. And, there's the shortest range of motion. Yeah. And then, so you and I do the same thing. We introduce that variation either day 1 or day 3 or, and that's just because we can see clearly that the person needs to have that, just break it down, make it really simple, focus on where the bar goes, how to hold the bar, what the legs are doing. And then those who have gotten that press from the very beginning with the hips, eventually they just can't keep pressing heavy. So that's when they get into more intermediate training. And part of our variation for the intermediates is a strict press, giving them a light day. That just allows them to have a light day where they can press and just build some shoulders, right? And focus on just pressing without having to, worry about grinding, reps, because eventually pressing heavy just becomes pressing heavy, and you need to press more in order for your press to get up. But, it doesn't have to be heavy all the time. Sorry.
And I was just thinking, like you have more variety of equipment in your gym too,
Right.
to introduce different variations of pressing. Like I just have a bar, right? So like I'm thinking about what press variations I use.
Yes.
So like a pin press, or I've had situations where I've had people do seated press.
Sure.
This is not an experience I've ever had, but some people are too tall to press in their basements.
Yep. Yep.
And so, those are really like the only variations that I have generally used for press. But like you've got Viking press, and you've got
So the strict press we'll do with people if they're intermediate trainees. It's a variation to introduce just a lighter press and to build some shoulders, because we can do multiple sets. Like we'll do sets of 6 to 8 reps. We can do that with or even an AMRAP kind of thing with the strict press. And it's nice and quick too. Yeah, somebody can do it like right after a bench. We've done seated presses for people. I usually do seated presses for any of my clients who are dealing with a knee injury or hip injury. I
remember when Bob had his foot in a boot, he was doing seated press.
I have 2 women right now doing seated presses, because one is having ACL surgery in 2 weeks. The other one just had hip surgery. So neither one can stand on their legs to press. So they do seated presses. Craig's doing seated presses right now because he just likes them. And of course, Diego got on the bandwagon, so he's doing seated presses. They're doing with a Viking press. And I should say that, they're actually not doing a barbell seated press. They're doing a Viking press. So we have a Viking press attachment that we can put onto an axle. That's in a landmine that's locked into our column. And the Viking press allows you to press in either a neutral grip or with a pronated grip. And man, Diego loves the Viking press. And even if you're not doing it seated, but you're doing it standing, it's a really nice variation and modification for the press for those people who are just not good pressers, or who have any shoulder mobility issues and can't get into a good proper overhead position. It also just takes out the balance issue. You're not having to worry about that. Bob was doing Viking press because of his balance issues with his, he had that Achilles tendon issue. So, but we have so many people. We have two implements now. I got a second Viking press implement because we have so many people doing that variation at the gym.
So you had people lining up for it?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, like they'll do something else while they're waiting for the Viking press. It is used a lot. And that's a nice variation, not just for a modification for somebody who's injured, but just in general, it's a nice way to build shoulders and build an overhead position without having to worry about too much technique. Doesn't require much technique at all. Diego swears by it. I think he would, if he had it his way, everyone would Viking press at the gym, and no one would barbell press. Blasphemy. Blasphemy.
Why does that get attributed to the Vikings?
I don't know.
On their Viking ships, they were like,
"Hey, let's do this." I have no idea. Idea. Okay, so that's it. And then pin press. We haven't discussed that, but that's that's a press variation. I would definitely not do that with any novice lifters. That's definitely more of a intermediate and somebody who really is pressing much having a really difficult time with bar path. But it's the pin press is not used too much at least with us at the gym. Only a couple people might use that. That's one lift that I don't tend to use. That one variation, I should say, I don't tend to use too often.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I guess Nick Delgadillo did a nice video on that one.
Yeah.
So anyway. Moving
on. Squats.
Yeah.
Lots of variations with that. I definitely. What would you use early on? When would you introduce a variation on the squat?
Well, I mean, you start out sometimes with people similar to the new client I was just describing with fear of movement, where you just I even just ditch the language. We're not going to squat today. We're sitting in this chair.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're going to sit on a chair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now you're going to get up from the chair.
Yep.
And then 2 days later, it's like, 2 sessions later, whatever, that's called squatting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've been squatting and you're fine with it. So we're going to keep squatting.
Yeah.
But sometimes, people who like a squat, not even like, I know sometimes you guys talk about a squat to a box, not a box squat, not
Right.
like a West Side box squat.
Right.
But
We're not rocking back. Yeah.
I have people who actually start out that way, mainly just because they don't trust their bodies,
Mm-hmm.
or they have such limited strength
Mm-hmm.
that it's not a range of motion issue, and they can get down to a reasonable depth,
Mm-hmm.
and they can kind of even start working on getting up from that reasonable depth. But the last 2 inches, they collapse.
Yep.
Onto the box.
Yeah.
They, that's actually probably the first strength adaptation that's taking place, is that they gain control over those last 2 inches of lowering,
right,
just by doing body weight. So, starting with more like that, the West Side rock back, because
mm-hmm.
they've flopped onto the box,
mm-hmm.
and then, get them into the proper position, hinged forward a little bit,
Yep.
drive up with your hips out
Yep.
of that position,
Yep.
and then move towards just squat to the box, like
Yep.
just tap it and
Yep.
then come back up.
Yep.
But yeah, for people who have really, some serious strength limitations, like having that box back there is reassuring and allows them to get over any fears that they have about that movement as
Yep.
well.
Yep. I agree. I mean, as you said, it's the sitting in a chair. I mean, this box is now your chair. And you watch people who are weak, and you watch them as they're sitting down on the couch or in a chair, and you watch how they get up. What do? They have to put their hands on something to push themselves up. You can see how they want to move forward, and all you want to say to them is rock forward and drive up with your hips. Like, rock forward. And that's what you're teaching people, and that's what I teach people, those who come in. They could be younger and they could be older, it doesn't matter. I mean, sometimes the person they have such little strength, they have to learn how to use their hips. And how do you do that? You teach them to rock back and rock onto their toes and drive up with their butt. Yeah. And it's amazing when the person does that for the first time, they their eyes just pop out of their heads. They're like, no one's ever taught me to squat like this. I'm like, well, how does, sit down and stand up? No one sits down with a completely upright back. I tell people, would see if you saw someone sitting down like this, you'd think they were kind of weird. They, because I would sit down real upright, and it's hard to sit down like that. I said, The only way you'd see someone doing that is if it's a woman in a very tight dress who doesn't want to rip her dress. Occasionally I've been in dresses that are really tight. You can't quite do that move, and you have to sit down. You have to sit like a real lady, no
slouching.
But for most of us, it's, I tell people, what do you do when you sit down in a chair or something, or even on the toilet? You kind of look behind you to make sure it's there, and you put your hips back and you sit down. They're like, yeah. And that revelation is like, oh, I do it all the time. Yeah, you do it all the time. We're just going to do it with a little bit of weight now once you're ready to do it. So yeah, that box is essential. I'll throw it on. I'll use it either with somebody from day one, if they can clearly, even though they can get to the bottom, they can't stay in that bottom position because they're so weak, they'll fall right over. The box is there just in case they need it to sit down on. Or somebody who's having a hard time with depth. Maybe they're going too low. So you put the box where it is. It blocks them, because you'll see them slam their butt on the box. I'm like, yeah, see, that's when you can't go through the box.
Smack.
We always think that the box is there for somebody who's not squatting low enough. But sometimes it's there because the person's just going too low. And so you need to remind them that it's not that low. It's this low. It's just a little bit, it's just below parallel. And that helps them stay tighter then when they learn to not go, so low. So I'll use that, then pull it away, after a couple sessions. I
think we've both had people where the box actually initially is not even to depth, where it's the box is a high box.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So,
Oh yeah.
Another variation of a
Yep.
box squat.
Just like with the deadlift, kind of start them from top to bottom and work them down. So pile up a bunch of bumpers onto a box, get them where they can comfortably, do the movement properly, and then slowly take those bumpers away so they can get to proper depth. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the same thing. You work them from the top down, in that sense, because you can't really get them from the bottom up. And then with a box squat, I don't think we have anybody doing like West Side barbell box squats, right? Nobody's like got chains on their, on their bar doing like wide stance box squats. It really is just squatting to a box. For my intermediate lifters, it would be a variation with lighter weight to force them to control, their movement, right? Almost like a tempo squat, right? So they have to just kind of like touch it and it's a little pause, but it's not quite a pause squat. Because even with like a pause squat, when there's nothing underneath you, you can see people kind of going down. They'll go down to come up. The box can't do that. Like you just you touch it and then you have to come right back up. There's no little like extra movement you can do on the box that you can do with a pause squat when there's there's nothing underneath of you. So, that's where I might use a box squat. What about a pause squat? Would you use that early on in someone's training? I have.
I mean, I think occasionally, maybe just to, like we're talking about with some of the other movements, to give them a little bit more time to think about certain aspects of their movement.
Yeah.
So somebody who has trouble figuring out where depth is.
Yes.
Maybe just take a little extra second down there. But I mean, I guess really maybe more in terms of like a movement pattern for learning early on, and might use like a tempo squat, like the whole thing slow.
Yeah.
Slow the whole thing down.
Yeah. Yeah. And it usually doesn't stay in that long. It's just like, it's just, more like temporary to just kind of drill the movement pattern. I used a pause squat recently with one of my ladies. She's lifted before. And she's been with us for a couple months, but we're still trying to get her to get away from the habit of low bar, high bar squatting. You know what I mean? Like, so the bar is low, but she insists on trying to squat still, high bar position. So getting her to lean over. I use the pause squat to get her to shove her knees out. Like I had her at the bottom and I put my hand on the inside of her knee and pushed it out. Just by doing that, it was like, oh, and next thing you know, her knees are going out. The box actually wouldn't do that. I had her doing box squats or squatting to a box. That didn't seem to be it. It was when we did the pause squat that all of a sudden everything clicked. So there's a good example of like, we were trying to get her
squat with you yanking on her knees.
Yeah. The pause squat, yanking on her knees, forced her like, oh, that's what I do when my knees are out. The squatting to a box helped her with her depth because she was going a little bit too low and she was having issues with her hip, which she'd had in the past, when she was squatting, when she was lifting somewhere else. So we did that to make sure she wasn't going too low. Then once that was cleared up, there were still other things to work on. So the pause squat, we introduced the pause squat and I pushed on her knee, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's what you want me to do. It's like, yes, that's what.
So where are you having her pause then?
Right below just parallel.
At depth.
Yeah, just at depth. And now she's okay. She's better at depth. Like she's not going too low because she's figured out from the box where depth is for her. Now it's a matter of just get your knees out. Because that's why
I'll sometimes have people do like a pause squat. Maybe they pause at the bottom, or maybe they pause 2 inches up out of the hole. Because 2 inches up out of the hole is when the knees start to cave in.
Yeah. That's what we have. One of my ladies who's been with us for about 9 months now. She's tall. She's slender. She's squatting heavy weights, and her knees love to just cave. She's one of those, like the knees just kind of cave in, right? And that's very typical for women, right? That knee valgus. So Diego suggested, he actually said she probably would benefit from some pause squats now. So sure enough, on her volume day, I'm having her do pause squats. That's helped tremendously. She just pauses at the bottom and she focuses on keeping her knees out as she's coming up, because the minute she starts to come out, the knees want to come in. If we can get her to come out faster before the knees decided to take over, she's good. If the knees take over before she's out of that hole, it's all over. I mean, it's just that it's a timing thing. So the pause squats had helped quite a bit for her to kind of feel that bottom position, start to come out of it, and force the knees to, to remain in position. That's definitely helped with her heavy squats. But that's something we never did early on with her squatting. It's, this is something for her, she never had an issue getting to depth or, they looked good. It was just more of the knees coming in, just making her playing around with her stance, where her feet are. But the pause squats we just introduced to her now as the heavy weights as the weights have gotten much heavier, we're starting to really see when the knees want to come in. I do have her doing extra glute work too. She does some glute work on Wednesdays, and I don't know if that's helped or not, but she does it pretty consistently. So, I mean, it can't hurt, right? It can't hurt. But yeah, pause squats are usually introduced into like an intermediates program as a variation on the squat to provide them with a lighter squat day. Like that.
Yeah, and like as far as variations go or whatever, like on the light day, I have a couple people who, I mean, you get people a lot of times who end up with the elbow issue from the squat grip, and it's just sort of like this cycle. We address it, we get it under control. The weight gets heavy, it starts to be aggravating again. So I have some people where their light day squat is a high bar squat, just to even give them a break. So it's not 3 days a week of the low bar that's been aggravating their elbow, or sort of toss something in like that.
That's awesome. Yeah.
For a variety of reasons, like, elbow, wrist, whatever.
That's awesome. So just like with a safety bar squat, we have a safety bar. And the same thing, someone might substitute one of their lighter squats with a safety bar squat, maybe to focus more on their quads, just to get some quad work.
Or like a split squat.
Yeah, or split squat even, because just to have some extra work. I've been throwing in some extra leg work on my squat day. Why not? But the safety bar, the high bar squat for somebody who's with a shoulder or elbow issue. One of my clients who came to us after her frozen shoulder surgery. So she's been training with us since March or April. I think maybe April. She had the surgery in March, and she's now able to hold the bar. She does high bar squats, right? She could actually get that bar on her shoulder. And hold it. In the beginning, there was no way she was going to be able to squat with the barbell. So we used the camber bar, and even that was hard for her to get that one arm, But over time, with her physical therapy combined with her getting stronger, it's amazing what she can do. Her bench is over 100 now. She's pressing with the bar now. We were doing Viking presses for her because of her mobility, but that shoulder is still quite painful, in a sense, to hold that bar like that as the weight gets heavier. So then she tends to focus on the shoulder and less on her knees. The knees cave and she goes on her toes, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I told her, I said, look, I know you want to squat with the barbell. I do. I want you to also. I said, but you can't push that shoulder. You have to. You've come so far, right? I don't want anything to frustrate you too much. Let's go back to the camber bar for your heavy squat, and for your light squat, use the barbell. Just there's no reason why you need to, and she said, you're right. Because the camber bar is great for her. I mean, she can get in that position easily. She'll be able to squat more weight because she doesn't have to think about, the shoulder too much. And then we can still practice with the bar and gain, get more flexibility, mobility, but not with the heavy amount of weight that, she was trying to push before. So yeah, that's a great variation, doing a high bar squat to give the person some relief. That's exactly what we're doing. Yeah, it's the other way around. We're kind of using the camber bar to give her the relief from her shoulder, so she's not constantly.
Well, you have more bar options.
I love my bar option. I love my bar option. I think it's necessary. It's like having a light bar for, a technique bar for, for women and for older people. And for teenagers, and having, a variation of bars that you can grip with a neutral grip.
Full bar.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. That's why they make them. And it helps keep the person training. I think our
Yeah.
clients really appreciate it. That's
the thing with the squat. Like, I mean, there are, reasons that are explained in ample detail in all of the books about why the low bar back squat is the preferred squat. But when you have an individual whose training is regularly interrupted because a shoulder, an elbow, something, this is really not related to the squat. It's just related to how the bar is held on the back. And you could still be squatting if you were doing something different. Okay, it's not the ideal, but for that person, that might be the best we can do to maintain consistency. I'd rather have the person maintain consistency than consistently do low bar squat and consistently have to drop training off.
There's no reason for you to injure yourself further or potentially, injure something else because you're still trying to push yourself in a position that's just not,
Yeah, I think we've talked about this in relation to Todd, right?
Yeah.
Todd will do low bar squat and then he'll piss off his elbow. He'll piss his elbow off, right? Because he does that thing. He's got the kyphotic or however you pronounce that. Kyphos. So anyway, the low bar is a difficult position for him to get into. He forces it. He upsets his elbow, and then he's like, "I'm done with lifting," and he won't lift again for 6 months.
Yeah.
Or actually, right now we're on a new longer stretch than that. So.
Instead of just going, you know what? I don't have to do this type of squat.
Yeah, the last time he picked it back up, I was like, I'm not even dealing with low bar squat with you. You are only high bar squatting.
I mean, the minute I stopped doing thumbs over and I went to thumbs around the bar, my elbow pain, boom, gone. It still does. Is it still
for a lot of people?
Of course it does, and I'm fine. I could squat my thumbs over. I don't. There's no reason to. It doesn't matter. That's not part of the model. It really isn't. But it's, and I don't fight with people anymore. I just put them in the right position that's going to make them, squat without having to worry about, any searing pain, through their shoulder. We don't, unfortunately, we live in a society where we hunch over a lot, at the computer and the car and eating. And so we don't have that, we don't stand tall. So getting out of the bar can be very difficult for some people. And then you force them to.
I was working with a guy today where he lost he's doing his deadlift, his 5th rep. He lost some of that chest through upper back extension. The way he described it was, he's like, yeah, I got that computer back on my 5th rep.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, you did.
But everybody does face
computer pulls. Back.
I have everybody doing face pulls at my gym. We all do face pulls, pull aparts, anything we can do for our extra, for extra back work, because that's just, it's not going to hurt you. It's only going to help. And you can throw that into anything. But yeah, I don't, the squat variations are rampant at my gym. I mean, I want the person to be able to squat, whether that's with a bar, with a dumbbell, with a kettlebell, with a camber bar, a safety bar. Doesn't matter to me. So people who don't have coaches, people who aren't training at a gym where, there are ample bars to choose from, maybe they have home gyms, investing in a 2 different bars. I know Ryan has a safety squat bar at home, at his home gym. Not a bad idea to have something just in case. I had 2 ladies break their wrists in 2 separate car accidents, and they kept squatting because I had a safety bar, which they could hold on with one hand. They don't need, you could even hold on to the rack and have the bar sitting on your back and squat. So lots of ways to keep your training, consistent, and do lots of variations. And that's what the 2 women who have, the knee and the hip issue, variations on their lifts. I think we covered pretty much the big ones. I mean, those are those. Well,
we didn't do bench.
We didn't do bench. No, we didn't do bench.
But bench and squat, you're going to
same thing.
Do some, to me, they're kind of similar.
Yeah.
You might do a tempo bench for learning purposes, learn the bar path. You might do paused at the touch point to help reinforce. You could do that for learning purposes, to reinforce what that feels like to, squeeze your chest up to the bar.
Yep.
Not lose tightness at the bottom position.
Yep.
So those, I think, are places where I might use a variation as a teaching tool.
Absolutely.
And then otherwise, introduce, either tempos or paused, or maybe a narrow grip or a wide grip in intermediate training, just to introduce a different training stress.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for the intermediate lifters, it's usually always just to have them moving lighter weight, right? Giving them a day where they don't have to stress their body so much, because the weight is heavy, and there is a definite difference between heavy and light. Whereas the novice, everything is, all the weight's the same. It's heavy every time they come in. It's always heavy, right? So there's no reason to make things complicated for them. But for an intermediate lifter, doing a close grip bench to maybe get a little bit more tricep. I know close grip bench kind of messed me up though, because you touch a little bit lower on the chest. So I had to watch that when I went back to benching after doing some close grip. It was finding my bar path was kind of messed up, so it didn't quite work for me. But
then you go back to a tempo.
You go back to a tempo. Pause benches are great. Pause bench is great to use for like even novice lifters, just for them to learn where the position is on the chest, where the bar is touching them. Tempo is built in because people want to drop the bar on their chest really fast. So I force them to go 1, 2, touch on 3, 1, 2, touch on 3. And I'll count it. I'll count them as they're doing it. That just reinforces the chest up, the tight back, as you were saying, kind of a tempo without even calling it tempo. It's just more of like slow it down. Pin bench. I guess that's like a pin squat. We didn't talk about that. Not too many people do pin squats at my gym, but occasionally. I don't think she's squatting too much right now, but she's done pin squats. That's nice, where it's like a real stop at the bottom, no stretch reflex. Same with the bench, like a pause but worse. Because again, the pause you have you could have that little bounce there where you're like. You're really stuck, but I think the bench variations are not as nearly as I use nearly as much as maybe the other variations for the other lifts. But these are just so we just wanted to talk about variations that we might use when we're training newer lifters or intermediate lifters, considering adding into your own program if you don't have a coach. Or if you're training on your own, how to make a lift, how to break down a lift, really kind of focus on the technique and the position, and also allow you to lift a little bit lighter weight, and it makes it difficult too. Pause squats are not easy. They're a difficult exercise. Pause deadlifts are not easy. They're difficult. So you're making the lifts
are ways to make light weights hard.
It's lightweight, but it's hard. You're taking out all that stretch reflex. So I think we'll wrap it up there. If people have got questions about anything that we discussed today on these variations, feel free to always, of course, email us, Emily@5by3.com or Rebecca at
cornerstonestrengthmaryland@gmail.com.
So you can always ask either one of us. And again, always, if you've got a question, we'd love to have your questions. We'd love questions from listeners. Feel free to send us your question or comment. It can be a comment that you want us, or even a podcast that we've done before and you want us to discuss a little bit more. We're happy to.
You can also check out 5by3 for the Ullman.
Yes.
How to remind people how to do that.
We are about a month, not a little over a month, a little under a month before the contest. September 12th is our Charm City Strongwoman contest. Go to our Facebook page and find the link to my page where you can donate. There's also a link for the t-shirt. If you want to purchase a t-shirt and donate, you can always just write a check and mail it off to the Ullman Foundation as well. And you can look them up online, ULMAN, Ullman Foundation. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful week. And Rebecca and I will be back in a couple weeks with our next podcast. I have no idea what the topic's going to be because I got the last topic yesterday. But we look forward to talking about whatever it is that we decide to talk about soon. All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rebecca.
Hey, take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to 5x3 Radio with Emily and Rebecca. If you like our show and want to know more about 5x3 training, please visit us at www.5, that's F-I-V-E, the letter X, the number 3.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. To learn more about Rebecca, please visit her website, cornerstonestrengthmaryland.com. Thanks for listening and have a great week.